Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. And good afternoon. From the Arcadian Court in downtown Toronto, welcome to the 113th season of the Empire Club of Canada. Now, for those of you just joining us through either our webcast, our podcast, on Rogers TV, welcome to the meeting. Before our distinguished speaker is introduced today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our head table guests. I would ask that each guest rise for a brief moment and be recognized when I call their name. And traditionally, we say, hold your applause until everybody has stood, but nobody ever listens to that. So this season, clap away as much as you like as I call names. We're doing things differently. So, first, His Excellency Bruce Heyman, United States Ambassador to Canada. Ms. Pamela Griffith-Jones, Chief Executive Officer, Newport Aviation Infrastructure Partners, GP. Mr. Marco Mendicino, Member of Parliament for Eglinton Lawrence and Ontario Caucus Chair. Mr. Jeff Wilson, Chief Executive Officer of Ports Toronto and a Director at the Empire Club of Canada. Mr. Vijay Kanwar, co-founder and president of KMH Nuclear Cardiology Centers. Next, we have Mr. William White, chairman of IBK Capital Corp. And another director at the Empire Club of Canada. Next, we have Mr. Jeffrey Brown, executive vice president and chief financial officer for Porter Airlines. Beside him is Mr. Michael White, Chief Executive Officer of IBK Capital Corporation. Ms. Catherine Murray, host, Business Day PM and Market Call Tonight for the Business News Network. And my name is Paul Fogelin. I am the Vice President of the Ontario Retirement Communities Association and the President of the Empire Club of Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, your head table guests. So you may have noticed some smiling faces greeting you as you came in today. Those are our friends, the students joining us from Centennial College. Where are you? Where are the folks? Oh, there they are. Let's give them a hand. I'd also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge a few other guests with us today. This being our kickoff to the 113th season, I have the support of my girlfriend, Candice DeVay, and my parents, John and Linda Fogelin. I won't make them stand. And we also have three past presidents of the Empire Club with us today, which is tremendous. We have Mr. Noble Chumar, Mr. Peter Hermont, and Mr. Gordon McIver. In celebration of our 150th birthday, which is next year, and this being our second event in the Sesquicentennial series, I would now ask our guest, Ambassador Heyman, as well as Mike White, our sponsor, to join me on stage. We have this tradition where we blow out the candles to celebrate our Sesquicentennial. You never know with live fire, it's not scripted, so. All right, as many of you know, in 1903, the Empire Club of Canada was actually founded by a group of men who were genuinely concerned that Canada would join the United States. Well, in 113 years, we have come a long way. As we approach the 150th anniversary, we remain a sovereign nation. The Queen is still on our money. And the prospect of manifest destiny is about as likely as the Leafs winning the Stanley Cup. This year, okay? hang with me. In fact, our club has had the honor of hosting a U.S. ambassador representing virtually every American president since our founding. And in perhaps a slight twist of irony, I myself am actually a dual citizen. So, times have indeed changed. To borrow an observation from author C.S. Lewis, there are two basic types of relationships. In a two-way relationship, people look at each other. In a partnership, they look in the same direction together. Today, we are privileged to welcome as our guest speaker a distinguished American who, as his country's chief representative in Canada, is well-versed in partnership. Bruce Heyman was confirmed as President Obama's personal representative to Canada on March the 12th of 2014. Since his appointment, Ambassador Heyman has been coast to coast, traveled to every province and territory, and been welcomed by Canadians with open arms wherever he's traveled. His portfolio includes, but is not limited to, trade, border issues, energy, environment, and global cooperation. Furthermore, Ambassador Heyman has played a pivotal role in orchestrating Prime Minister Trudeau's now iconic White House State Dinner, as well as President Obama's historic address to Canada's Parliament earlier this year, where the President received a rock star's welcome and was serenaded with chants of 4 more years. If only. You could say Ambassador Heyman has had a front row seat to the now famous Obama-Trudeau bromance. But in all seriousness, the mutual respect between our two leaders illustrates just how close our two countries are aligned these days. And this is a very good thing, because now, perhaps more than ever, it's imperative that our countries look in the same direction together. To meet the challenges we both face, but also to remind our partners around the globe that we are, in fact, stronger together. Our current global climate is one fraught with economic uncertainty and haunted by the specter of terrorism. Perhaps most concerning, a growing number of political leaders are advocating for a turn inward in order to protect and to placate an increasingly frustrated and fearful middle class. Ambassador Heyman will address these subjects and more today in conversation with Catherine Murray. But first, I'd like to share a few facts about His Excellency. Bruce Heyman is a 33-year veteran of Goldman Sachs, where he served as the managing director of the Private Wealth Management Group from 1999 till December of 2013. Mr. Heyman has served as a board member for the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and the Northwestern Memorial Hospital Foundation. A magna cum laude graduate with both a BA and an MBA from Vanderbilt University, Mr. Heyman continues to maintain close ties to his alma mater, where he is past president of the Alumni Board. He and his wife, Vicki, have 3 grown children, David, Liza, and Caroline, and 3 grandchildren, Emma, Clara, and Brooks. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming His Excellence Ambassador Heyman and Catherine Murray to the stage.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Whoops.
There's a water under there.
Water. Thank you very much, Paul, and great to be here. Good afternoon, everyone, and great to be with you, Ambassador.
Good
Thank
to see you.
Great to see you as always. Let's pick up on what Paul was just talking about as it relates to the relationship between Canada and the United States. It's been so strong for so long, but there is a renewed focus on it with a little bit of concern, which is quite new for many Canadians and probably Americans as well. What's the latest? What's the update? What's your assessment?
Well, my assessment, first of all, Paul, thank you for the kind words, and thank everyone here for your generous time today and allowing me to have a little lunch with you and some conversation about the U.S.-Canada relationship. The U.S.-Canada relationship has never been stronger than it is right now. And so let's build upon what had taken place. And I thought I'd give you a little background as to how we prepared for a change in government a year ago. And then how this last year has progressed, and then if you wouldn't mind, then I can take it into the path ahead. So virtually a year ago now, you were in the middle of a campaign. A lot of things were being said by all different parties, but what we were doing at the embassy and in all of our consulates, we were taking time preparing for a change in government. Either there would be a re-election of the sitting prime minister And there would be governmental change typically that would happen, either ministers or goals or aspirations of the sitting government, or you would have a new leader and a new party taking hold. And what we did, just so you have a picture, in our embassy, picture all of you working in the embassy, we have various departments of the U.S. government all represented within the embassy. And I have that group come together every week in what is called a country team. And in that country team, we typically go through and have tactical conversations as to what's upcoming, visitors, the issues and opportunities that we're working on bilaterally with Canada. But in this particular case, during the election, what I did was I gave everybody in the room an assignment. And the assignment was, let's prepare for the new government and what are the top priorities of your agency in the United States, and what would you like to see get accomplished with new government? And so we did that around the room, and not only did we do it around the room, but I forced every single person to stand up and tell everybody else around the room. So the Commerce Department could hear what the border people were talking about. And the folks over in the Econ group could talk to the Commerce Department, could talk to FBI and Department of Homeland Security and everybody else who's represented within our embassy. And we had that conversation. They didn't just come up with that uniquely within the embassy. They worked with Washington to develop those strategies. And then I flew to Washington. And I did the same thing in Washington. I brought together the heads or deputies within each of these departments. And we had a sit-down session to talk about Canada and the importance of the relationship. And we talked about the various parties and what we thought may or may not happen in the election coming up, but more importantly, what the goals were for each of the parties and what they were articulating up here and how that fit for us. So now the embassy, our consulates, the U.S. government in Washington, we were all on the same page going into your election. The most important thing I articulated to everybody, while we have things that we'd like to get accomplished, before we sit down with the Canadians and talk about any of these things, it's important to understand what the Canadians would like to get accomplished in the new government with the U.S.-Canada relationship, which is what we did right away. But good news is the campaign really brought out a lot of those goals. And so we found ourselves very early on understanding what the new government wanted to get accomplished, and we worked directly with the new government. What did we do? We were joined at the hip in Paris and completely communicating of the goals and aspirations of what we'd like to get done in Paris on the climate change. Although announced later publicly, we had extended right away an invitation for a state dinner. That happened as a result of the work that we did in the embassy and throughout Washington and the focus on Canada that was, even before the election was done, this was being bantered around and we were talking about this. So we were very quick to do this. First time in nearly 20 years a state dinner had taken place, and President Obama had had very few of those. But people ask me, how did that happen so fast in a brand new government? It was the work that was done going into it. Mm-hmm. We then did the state dinner, but a state dinner really is just a celebration in the evening. What happened during the day was where all the real work was done. And what happened getting ready for that day for the months before was where we drove the outcomes for that. And sitting there across from the President and the Prime Minister in the Oval Office was one of the most amazing experiences for me personally. But if all of you could sit in that room, you would see by extension the true caring, love, friendship, partnership that was taking place between these two men and our two countries. And you would have been incredibly proud of what was going on in that room. But then it was shortly thereafter that the Prime Minister, in fact, at that meeting, the Prime Minister asked the President to address Parliament. First time in 20 years that had ever happened in Canada, a president coming in and speaking before Parliament and committing to a North American Leaders Summit, which was the first time in nearly a decade that had happened in Canada. And we have had very productive time. Mm-hmm. We have laid the foundation not only for the next few months in the balance of the administration, but we've laid the foundation, I think, for many, many, many years to come. Mm-hmm. Now, prior to that, We also had a good relationship. And don't get me wrong, I've described a lot of things that we achieved bilaterally, but nearly 10,000 visitors from the U.S. government come to Canada on business every year. Mm-hmm. And what is that? Well, we work on everything. Food safety, we work on military, we work on trade, we work on environment, we work on everything you can possibly think of, we do together. And that is going to continue regardless. I will tell you, the foundation of this relationship is bigger than anyone occupying the White House or 24 Sussex.
And I think that's what certainly a lot of Canadians are most curious about, because as we discussed earlier, today, 77% of our business is directed towards the United States. It's our biggest client if we're all in business. And it is critical, it's crucial, and it sounds as though this current relationship between the Prime Minister and the President, very much interests align. And because of that, to your point, a lot has gotten done. But let's just peel it back a little bit in terms of what some of the underlying concerns are, if we can, and to alleviate those concerns.
So I think you'll have to articulate to me what you think the concerns are. I've been pulled aside at every point across this country and asked about the election. So let me give you first some context. As a U.S. diplomat, I am required not only practically but by law not to support any candidate for any political party or office, called the Hatch Act. So I want you to take that and take my comments going forward in consideration that I represent 330 million people in the United States of all parties, persuasions, backgrounds, and then even people who don't care about such things. So keeping all that in mind, I believe, based on the business people that I've spoken with, based on individuals, based on everybody, I believe that the U.S.-Canada relationship will be firm, rises above anything that has anything to do with the election. I know election dialogue can cause people some angst because of the rhetoric that happens in elections themselves. I will tell you, we're going to get through this next 60-plus day period. We will have a new president, and the only prediction I'll make is it will be somebody from New York State. And other than that, I have a lot of confidence. I think as both presidents take hold, one of the things that we're doing now, I articulated about a change in government and preparing for it. Well, we're doing the same thing in the embassy today for a change in government in the United States. And what are we doing? We're building together the priorities for all those departments, but we're also communicating with you, Canada, with the government of Canada, with individuals, and taking that into consideration as we develop this platform. And our plan is, whether it's this ambassador or the next, to sit down and articulate to the new U.S. government, the priorities for this relationship. And given where those priorities are and how I know they're coming together, the way it reads is number one trading partner, largest border that we have, a NATO ally, partner in NORAD, partner in environment and climate, partner in the Arctic, partner. And, it's, I think that regardless of who's in the White House, they'll recognize that this relationship is one of, if not the most important in the world. And
probably one of the strongest in the world, and certainly has been for a very, very long time. With respect to some of those key objectives, let's talk about what has been accomplished over the past 14 months or so. I know you've been inordinately busy. What are some of the key accomplishments you think that you've achieved so far, that we've all achieved?
So first of all, we sit together and we talk about all of the things that we face together as partners, and I think you articulated that well at the beginning. And in doing that, when we made the announcements that came out of the state dinner, a large portion of those announcements related to the border. The border, when I travel around the country and I ask everybody, what is the number one thing that you think about? Whether it's a businessman or woman, whether it's an individual who's going on vacation or somebody who's studying, whether it's, functioning at the provincial level, the municipal level or the federal level, everybody mentions the border and the functioning of the border. I think we accomplished a lot in our meeting in Washington, and that what we did is we began to discuss the various things and needs that both sides had. Now, the border, to function well, needs to do two things. One, it has to have appropriately fast and easy transit of trusted traders and travelers and people who we have confidence in, and it moves very quickly and expeditiously. And two, it's appropriately difficult to transit the border for those people that potentially want to do either side harm, or at a minimum, we have more questions for. So we already, by the way, have an incredibly active border. 400,000 people on average cross the border every single day. 400,000. We have 120 border crossings. Toronto Pearson Airport is now the fourth largest entry point into the United States, with nearly 6 million passengers going through Pearson Airport to the United States every year, which is pretty incredible. So to balance that out, we need to sit down and find what works for you and what works for us, and how do we find that balance. We agreed to information sharing. We agreed to sharing no-fly list. But in addition to sharing the no-fly list, we want to make sure there was a redress possible, that if somebody ended up on that list and they didn't think they were supposed to, that there was a way to get out. We also agreed to expansion of pre-clearance here at Billy Bishop, and Billy Bishop, and if I didn't mention Billy Bishop, also Quebec City, and Montreal Rail and Via Rail out west. But this agreement moves from air to land, marine, and it's really a new generation version of our pre-clearance agreement, which has been in place for a very, very long time. So I think we've gotten a lot done with the border. I also think in the North American Leaders Summit, there were several key announcements that were made. One that had no news, very little pickup, which I think is the most important announcement of all, which I'll come back to in a second. And the second, which was also had news, which was very important, but getting to 50% renewable energy by 2025 in North America, which is a great laudable goal. The item that did not get much news, which I think actually can stand to be one of the most important, is something called the North American Caucus. Now, the North American Caucus is something that we all came together, our three countries, Mexico, Canada, and the United States, came together and said, if we have like viewpoints around political, economic, global issues, then we should come together and use a singular voice that would be much more powerful in the world. And so I think the initial focus was really through Latin and South America, but I can easily see this become a singular voice where we can come together and articulate our vision in Europe and in Asia and in Africa and in other places around the world. And so in formation, working together, meetings are going to start taking place this fall in trying to really beef up the North American caucus, sorry.
Ambassador, with respect to trade, you mentioned it briefly. Maybe we can put the economic hat on. Having spent 33 years at Goldman Sachs, I think many people would like to hear your views of the U.S. economy right now. It's such a hot topic and highly debated in terms of whether it's strong or whether it is weak. And there are underlying issues, particularly with respect to the rise of populism and what that's telling us.
Okay, so bear with me. I'll go through a little bit of an economic dissertation. But when President Obama came to office, I remember that cold January day so clearly at Inauguration Day. We were losing about 900,000 jobs a month. Unemployment was skyrocketing. The financial system was in near collapse. The auto industry was about ready to collapse. We were in a financial crisis, large part due to the leverage that was done on home ownership, but all kinds of debt was under pressure. The stock market was in free fall, and we were in deep crisis. Welcome to the office, Mr. President. Oh, by the way, shortly thereafter, there was an oil well that was leaking that they said, we have an oil well leak in the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm sure he said, okay, fix it. And they said, we can't. And this is how the first few months began for this man. And here we sit today. Let's just fast forward. Yes, the oil well has been capped, thank goodness. But more importantly, unemployment went and peaked at 10%. It's now 4.9%. We added 15 million jobs. The auto industry not only is growing, but thriving and hitting record sales levels over each of the last 3 years. Home prices have rebounded significantly. The stock market, by almost all measures, is near record highs. Interest rates are low. The level of debt relative to GDP, the deficit we were running on an annual basis, is now down in the 2.5-ish range percent after getting up close to 10%. Healthcare is provided to millions of people that weren't provided before. Oh, by the way, just as an aside, we have an Iran nuclear deal. We have Cuba relations that have been opened up. I think the president's legacy is going to be rich and wonderful. But what's going on? What's with this populist thing? Mm-hmm. So let me peel back the unemployment, maybe tell you the number a little bit. At 4.9%, unemployment, if you have a college degree or higher, is about 2.6%. Full employment. Unemployment, if you don't have a high school degree, is kind of between 6.5% and 7%. And what's happening is, as we are, and I believe the United States, the leader in the world in terms of technological innovation, entrepreneurship, disruptive change, and all of that that's been going on, that you read and hear about so much, is simultaneously displacing workers in the middle class, especially people who don't have lots of different skill sets. So all of a sudden, you have this technology that's getting implemented, automation, and it's happening at an increasingly fast rate as technology is ramping up. And so if you've lost your job, and you now, by the way, you found another job, but you don't make anything close to what you were making before, or you're struggling to make ends meet, you're very frustrated. And so wages for that group have actually fallen a bit, and wages for the top people in our economy, the top 1%, the skill-based, have increased. So the gap between rich and poor has widened. And so you have this frustrating public. And I believe a large portion of it is related to automation and technological change. But it's hard to say you blame your iPhone for your loss of a job. It's hard to mentally say that. And it's easy to sit down and say it's because of some trade agreement or some other country has taken those jobs away. And so I believe that it is misfocused. It should be focused on the fact that technological change, we are in the middle of that era right now. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have to get used to this. Oh, by the way, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better because the technological change is happening at an increasingly fast rate. And so we're going to have further challenges here with the population. And we're going to have to create the appropriate transition time in our economy for those that need new skills, that can get new skills, but those that are maybe beyond the skill training level, which I don't think that anybody is really beyond it. But we're going to have appropriate safety nets in our society to get us through this transition.
Ambassador, is that being looked at as, obviously it's a real situation, but is it being looked at as a situation that needs a solution? And what are the discussions surrounding what that solution might be? Because it is clearly a very, very difficult time. And to your point, everybody can always learn and gain new skills, but that's difficult to do for a large group of people.
I don't think there's a panacea. That's the problem. You can't just, this is the quick fix. You can't say we don't want automation and innovation. That way we'll just keep the jobs of all the companies we have. Because guess what? some other country or somebody else is going to do the automation innovation, and we'll put you out of business. So you have to continue to keep up and innovate and create. The president used this language, and if you go back and look at the speech he gave in Ottawa, he talked about automation, and we shouldn't let automation be a driver of the gap between rich and poor, and we should take that into account. The reality is, again, and I think we had this conversation earlier, my generation, people like me, we are immigrants to the technological age. My children are first generation of the technological age, and maybe their children are just native to the technological age. So how much, you all know, and some of you arrived in this country, how much when you first arrived here, the customs and language and all of that was so foreign, and how many people do you know that go to their children and say, how does this iPhone work, or what were they saying culturally? I am an immigrant to the technological age, and I'm trying my best to adapt to the new skills. We just have to get through it. Just the way we went from an agrarian society to industrial society, a lot of people lost their jobs on the farm, and that's all they knew was farming. And we tried our best to figure out how to get them into the industrial age, but there was some period of time where it was just incredibly challenging for those people. And what would happen, though, even in that time, at least when technological change was happening, the car came versus the horse and buggy, it took a while. Like you could see it coming. Now with technological change that literally can replace people, employees, and services overnight, quickly. And so the ability to transition to that is becoming even more challenging. I just think this is going to be one of the challenges that not only the next U.S. government, but the whole Western society and developed nations, I think in part, maybe this had something to do with the Brexit vote. Maybe, in fact, that this has to do with the frustration that people have with various leaders. Because as a leader, as a government, you have two responsibilities, and everything else falls under these. Prosperity of your people and safety. If you can provide prosperity and safety, you can stay in charge forever. But sometimes circumstances get beyond your even control in being a leader. And I think this prosperity nature is under question for those people in that middle segment that are going through this change in the economy.
It's interesting. So often we focus on China in terms of their changing economy, but the reality is it's exactly happening here in North America, and Brexit, to your point, was emblematic of that for sure. Curious as well, switching focus here a little bit, Ambassador. I think, well, we spoke briefly on Friday, and I know you were very, very busy on Friday, as you always are. So I'm quite curious, and I think most of us probably would be, what a day in the life is like for you as Ambassador to Canada?
It's wonderful. You get to represent the United States here in Canada. It's just fantastic. But there is no normal day, but I'll run through some of the things that we do. Obviously, if I'm in Ottawa or anywhere else, what we've done is we put a team together that works on accumulating the media from around the world, all publicly available media, and brings it together, distills it down for me, but I've expanded it. It used to be just an ambassadorial briefing. I now open this up to everybody within the embassy community, and I go in a conference room after settling in the morning, and the press team comes in and reviews the press, but it becomes almost a semi-mini strategy session, because as things come up in the press, I then bring the entire team around the table and say, okay, this was in the press. How do we respond to that? What do we say? What is the real story? What is the backstory? Is this true or not true? We end up making mini strategy sessions. This is great. Oh, by the way, then it's evolved for me. So we have the currency, we have the price of oil, we have breaking news around the world, top headline news for the U.S., but also then anything that has a Canada-U.S. A basis to it anywhere in the world, which happens to be almost everything because we do almost everything together. I then sit down. I also get sometime during the day, I get a full-on security briefing a confidential briefing on the things that may affect the U.S.-Canada relationship. So I get public, private, 2 different briefings every day, and so that gives you context. The rest of the day is filled with a combination of government, business, social interactions. And where this has now gotten is that, the benefit of being here now 2.5, 3/4 years is that there are a lot of push and pulls. We've traveled coast to coast to coast, so all the provinces and territories, and we're getting a lot of requests from across the country. And so it's about sorting through these things and then how to prioritize, and always prioritize the interactions with the government of Canada at the top, and then we work from there. But our days are running right now up at 6, bed at midnight, and probably working almost all times between that. And I have never worked harder in my entire life. I've not unplugged yet. I did have a couple of times unplugged. I think the embassy found a cottage that was out of any cell or things, and like waving the phone up in the air. But it took me a while.
7 days a week.
And 7 days a week. So you're on 7 days a week, you're on call. If an ambassador needs to leave to go back to the United States or another country, you need permission from the U.S. government, you need to notify the Canadian government, and you need to designate someone who's going to be the charge d'affaires. And so that it's a very formal process to do that. The Obama administration also made it very clear, we want our ambassadors to be ambassadors, and you're going to be in country. We don't want you out like running around back at the States or doing things unless for business, and appropriate amount of vacation, but not very much. So,
within your portfolio, your focus areas, what's next for you in terms of developing some of those key areas that you have already been focused on?
So let's tick through them real quickly. So it's trade, energy and the environment. It's cultural diplomacy and the work that we do culturally across our borders. My wife, Vicki, has taken on a very substantive role with that. Multilateral, what we do in the world on a multilateral basis, and then the border, tying that all together. I would say there's several things that are out there that we should focus on and what we should do. We obviously, and I know it gets a fair bit of headlines when we have differences or we're working on negotiating some aspect of trade. But the reality is that we have to keep perspective of the $669 billion US trade and goods and service relationship we have with Canada, and how large that is, and how you move the dial and how you take that. I continually tell Canadian businesses, if you want to expand internationally, we're asking you to look at the United States and select USA, and we're running a whole program of selecting the USA. Foreign direct investment, if you want to expand beyond Canada and foreign direct investment, select the USA and do that. But I do think that there is this component that exists between our two countries on trade that can have the biggest change between our two countries and how we can trade more. And that is regulatory cooperation. That the differences that we have, and I call it the narcissism of small differences, that we, 2 sets of regulators, 2 sets of rules, the rules aren't exactly the same, they're slightly different, and because of that, it is killing trade. When I sat down with the head of Campbell Soup, said to me, I'd like to make more soup. I'd do it in Canada, but the can size, the packing size, the trucking is very different than what we do in the United States, so we can't do it. Coca-Cola says, I'd like to make Diet Coke in Canada and ship it to the United States, but I can't because the labeling on aspartame is different. Lipstick with SPF, sun protection factor, is a drug in Canada. It's not in the United States. So to do that, you'd have to get drug approval. Baby car seats are different. We all know we want to protect our children in car accidents, but the regulations would say if you're driving across the border, you got to take the Canadian seat out, put the U.S. seat in, or vice versa. And these are just some examples, and it's killing us. It's killing us that we have these differences. It just grinds, and you don't see it because it's not a close of a plan. It's just the decision not to expand on one side of the border or the other. And I think that if we elevated this to its most serious level and we found a place, okay, let's draw a line in the sand here. These are all the regulations we have. These are the ones we have yet to develop. Let's make sure they're the same when we go forward. And if they're going to be different, let's have a process that you have to go through to make them different. But if you're going to keep them the same, we can move ahead. And if you're going to be different, you've got to have an appeal process, and you've got to demonstrate why. And maybe it's for health and safety, or it's maybe for other things. And I'm not saying one does it better than the other. I'm just saying we should do them together if we really want this to work.
Ambassador, we recognize that there's a problem. How hopeful are you that we're actually going to really make some progress?
So it's called, this group had been a working group called Regulatory Cooperation, RCC, Regulatory Cooperation Council. It's now been moved to the Treasury Board, and Scott Bryson and I have talked a number of times, and he has emphasized to me the importance that the Canadians are going to take with this. I would say, and we have OIRA back in the States, but we have a lot of other regulators. Point of optimism. This last meeting that took place, there was one other third path to make this work. The United States recognized Canada's food safety measures to be acceptable, even though the food safety and inspection measures were different than the United States. And it's only one other country we've done that with. I believe it's New Zealand. But the point being that we can also get to a point where we can say, yours is different than ours, but it's okay. And we just agreed to that. And so there's light here. But I would ask everybody here, as I will ask them directly, is to keep attention to this. Because, you know, there's these small things are like small cuts. Before you know it, you've bled out. I mean, because it is a real impediment to doing effective trade.
Ambassador, in coming full circle, we started with the conversation about Canada-U.S. relationship. What's your words of wisdom and really forward-looking in terms of how we should all be thinking about the immediate, which are the U.S. elections?
Yesterday was the anniversary of 9/11, 15 years. We took a substantial amount of time to pause and thank Canada once again. For the role that you individually and collectively played during that time period of great difficulty for our nation. Many Canadians, though, said to me, you don't have to thank us. That's what friends are for. That's what we do. I can assure you that we would be there for you on any day, and we are there for you every day, as I know you are there for us. We are such incredibly close friends. We may not agree where we're going to dinner on a certain night, and as good friends, we may debate that out. But there is nothing that is going to break this bond. But like every relationship, it continues to thrive by paying attention to it, by nurturing it. You can't take it for granted. I have had the most amazing experience being here for these last 2+ years. And I am your greatest advocate back in the United States, telling stories about the importance of this relationship. And that will end on any given day or any given change of administration. I commit to you that I will continuously be a strong U.S.-Canada advocate and promoting this relationship and the importance of it in this complicated world today. We mentioned Brexit just briefly. We talk about the stresses that are happening in other continents. We're very, very lucky to have each other as neighbors. And I've said over and over, if the U.S. could go out and just pick any other country in the world, we just pick who we'd want to be our neighbor, we'd pick Canada. This is the greatest. And so not only would we pick Canada, but we got Canada. This is even better. We're family. And the Peace Arch over at our border crossing in British Columbia and Washington says children from a common mother. And we are. Even though I now learned this club was formed thinking that somehow we were coming in. But whatever motivated you to have this great club, I think that's great. And so
thank you.
I have one last point. One last point. And that point is the following. If you know an American who's living in Canada, regardless of party, tell them to vote. This is the year that they should vote. They should vote in this election, and it's very easy. All you have to do is to go to fvap.gov, and it'll take 5 minutes, if that, to fill it out and get a ballot, and you'll be able to vote in this upcoming presidential election. And, you know, with it is a right and a privilege. And wherever Americans live, anywhere in the world, they have that right and privilege to be able to vote. And so I just encourage everybody to do that. Took me just a few minutes, so I promise it will not take a long time, because I'm an immigrant to technology, remember? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to welcome Jeff Wilson to the stage to provide the formal thank you.
Formal thank you.
No pressure.
Goodness, I'll do it with my button here. On behalf of the Empire Club, I would like to thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I think when we reached out to you some months back, we probably underestimated just how interesting this conversation was going to be. I think Catherine Murray did a magnificent job in posing the questions that we really have on our minds. And you spoke freely and you spoke candidly. And frankly, sir, you spoke with what appears to all of us as a great affection for Canada, as it is for your own home country. So I think all of us would join me in thanking you sincerely for taking the time to come to speak to us today, for sharing your views, for helping us to understand a little bit more behind the curtain, and we wish you the very best in continuing to represent the United States and Canada. Thanks, sir.
So now for the other thank you, the thank you to our sponsors who make these lunches possible. A generous thank you to our Sesquicentennial Series sponsor, once again, IBK Capital, to our VIP reception sponsor, Newport Aviation, and to our student table sponsor, Ports Toronto. I would also like to thank the National Post, which is our print partner, and Rogers TV, who's our local broadcast partner. We would like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, for live webcasting today's event to thousands of viewers around the world. And although our club has been around since 1903, we have moved into the 21st century and are very active on social media. So please follow us, if you don't already, at empire_club on Twitter, and visit us online at empireclub.org, and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Finally, please join us again soon. We have some extraordinary events coming up this month in September. Our next is a Next Generation of Leaders panel on the 19th of September, where the discussion will be focused on maximizing our greatest resource, which is our youth. And Mr. John Chen, CEO of BlackBerry, will be joining us in conversation on September 26th. And finally, on September the 28th, we have the CEO of Bombardier, Mr. Alan Belmer, joining us for a conversation as well. Thank you so much for your attendance today. Once again, Ambassador Heyman, thank you for coming. And the meeting is now adjourned.